My name is Chloe and I'm 16. Or at least I was 16 when it all happened. Back then, I felt more like a ghost than a girl, drifting through the crowded school corridors without anyone ever seeming to notice I was there. It wasn't that I wanted to be invisible, it was just easier that way. At home, the silence was a heavy blanket, a constant reminder that I was on my own. Mum was gone and Dad was just a shape in an armchair, lost in his own world of grief and television static. He didn't mean to be distant, I don't think. He just didn't have any space left for me, and I didn't know how to ask for it. So I learned to make myself small, to take up as little room as possible, both at home and at school. School was a different kind of battlefield. The noise was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of laughter, shouting and whispers that I never felt a part of. I'd walk with my head down, my worn-out trainers scuffing the lino, my gaze fixed on the floor to avoid catching anyone's eye. The other girls travelled in packs, their vibrant chatter and linked arms a world away from my solitary existence. They had inside jokes and weekend plans, secrets they'd share in hushed tones by the lockers. I had my books, characters in stories who became my only companions. They were predictable and safe, unlike the unpredictable currents of teenage social life that threatened to pull you under without warning. I just wanted to get through each day without any trouble. The trouble, however, always seemed to find me. It started with little things, a snigger as I walked past, a book knocked from my hands by accident. The main instigator was a girl named Zara. She had a sharp smile and even sharper words, and for some reason she decided I was her target. Her friends, like little satellites, orbited her, echoing her taunts and amplifying her cruelty. They'd corner me in the lunch queue or leave nasty notes in my PE kit. I never told anyone, not a teacher, not my dad. Who would I tell? It felt like admitting defeat, like showing them they'd won. I thought if I just endured it, if I pretended it didn't hurt, they would eventually get bored and move on to someone else. That was my biggest mistake. I didn't understand that their cruelty wasn't about boredom. It was about power. They enjoyed the feeling of control, the flicker of fear they saw in my eyes. My silence didn't make them stop. It only encouraged them. I spent my break times hiding in the library, losing myself in tales of faraway lands, trying to pretend the real world didn't exist just outside the door. But the bell would always ring, pulling me back to reality. I'd walk to my next lesson with my stomach in knots, my shoulders hunched, preparing for whatever might come next. I was a shadow, but I was a shadow they loved to torment. I just wanted it all to stop. It was the last day before the half-term holiday. A strange, electric excitement filled the air, the kind that always precedes a week of freedom. Everyone was buzzing, talking about plans for trips and lie-ins. I just wanted to get home to the quiet emptiness of my house, which felt safer than the boisterous corridors of school. My last lesson was maths, and I packed my bag slowly, trying to be the last one out of the classroom. I thought if I waited long enough, the hallways would clear and I could make my escape unnoticed. But Zara and her two friends, Mia and Sophie, were waiting for me. They stood by the door, blocking my path, their smiles thin and menacing. My heart started to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. "Where are you off to in such a rush, Chloe?" Zara sneered, stepping forward. I mumbled something about needing to get home, my eyes fixed on a crack in the floor. "Not so fast," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We've got a little game we want to play first." They herded me down the corridor, their presence a physical force pushing me along. I was too scared to scream, too frozen to fight back. My mind went blank with panic. We were heading towards the old part of the school, the bit that was rarely used. The silence grew as we moved further away from the main building, the cheerful sounds of the end-of-day rush fading into a distant memory. They pushed me towards the disabled toilets, a place that was always kept locked unless a specific key was used. But the door was ajar. "In you go," Mia giggled, shoving me hard from behind. I stumbled into the small, cold space. It smelled of bleach and damp. Before I could even turn around, I heard the heavy door swing shut behind me. The darkness was absolute, a thick, suffocating blackness that swallowed me whole. Then I heard the sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come, the sharp metallic click of a key turning in the lock. It was a sound of finality, a sound that sealed my fate. I was trapped. A wave of laughter echoed from the other side of the door, cruel and distant. Have a nice holiday, Chloe, Zara shouted, her voice muffled by the thick wood. We'll see you next week. Then their footsteps faded away, leaving me alone in the pitch-black silence. I threw myself against the door, my fists banging uselessly against the solid oak. Let me out! I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. Please! It's not funny! But there was no reply. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic, hopeless beating of my heart. They had gone. They had really, truly left me here, and nobody in the entire world knew where I was. The first day was a blur of panic and disbelief. I spent hours yelling until my throat was raw, my voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. I hammered on the door until my knuckles were bruised and bleeding, the splintered wood offering no give. Every fiber of my being was screaming for release, but the world outside remained stubbornly silent. The darkness was a living thing, pressing in on me from all sides, playing tricks on my eyes. I thought I saw shapes moving in the corners, but it was just the fear talking. The small high window was painted black, letting in no light, no hint of whether it was day or night. Time lost all meaning, stretching and contracting in a strange, terrifying rhythm. As the hours bled into what I guessed was a second day, a gnawing hunger began to replace the initial adrenaline. My stomach cramped, a hollow ache that echoed the emptiness of the room. Thirst was even worse, a dry, scratchy feeling at the back of my throat that made it painful to swallow. I ran my hands over the cold, tiled walls, desperately searching for a tap, a pipe, anything. I found the toilet cistern and, with trembling hands, lifted the heavy ceramic lid. The water inside was cold and clean. It tasted metallic and strange, but it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever drunk. It was a small victory, a tiny spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. I had water. I could survive a little longer. Loneliness was a cold, heavy cloak that settled over me. In the endless silence, my own thoughts became my tormentors. I thought about my dad, picturing him in his armchair, not even noticing my bed was empty. Would he even realize I was gone? The thought was a fresh stab of pain, sharper than the hunger. I curled up on the cold floor, wrapping my arms around my knees, trying to make myself as small as possible. I sang nursery rhymes to myself, the simple, childish tunes a fragile shield against the encroaching despair. I recited poems I'd learned in English class, the words a lifeline to a world that felt a million miles away. By what I guessed was the fourth or fifth day, a strange sense of calm descended. My body was weak, my movements slow and deliberate. The fierce panic had subsided, replaced by a dull, aching resignation. I had to conserve my energy. I slept in short, fitful bursts, waking up disoriented and cold. I started to talk to myself, my voice a strange, unfamiliar sound in the stillness. I told myself stories, described my favorite books, and made promises about what I would do if I ever got out. I would never take daylight for granted again. I would never be afraid to speak up. I would live. I had to. It became my mantra. A quiet, stubborn refusal to give up. I had lost all track of time. It could have been a week. It could have been a month. My world had shrunk to the four cold walls of my prison, the taste of cistern water and the sound of my own breathing. I was lying on the floor, my energy completely gone, drifting in and out of a hazy state that was neither sleep nor wakefulness. My body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The hope I had clung to so fiercely was beginning to fray at the edges, worn thin by the relentless silence and hunger. I thought I might just fade away in this place, a forgotten secret locked behind a heavy door. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of being alone. Suddenly a sound cut through the stillness. It wasn't a sound from inside my head, it was real. It was the faint jangle of keys from outside the door. My heart, which had been beating so sluggishly, gave a painful lurch. Was it them? Had Zara and her friends come back to taunt me again? Or was it a caretaker finally doing their rounds? A sliver of terror mixed with a desperate wild hope shot through me. I tried to call out, but only a pathetic croak escaped my lips. I was too weak. I listened, holding my breath as I heard a key slide into the lock. It wasn't the sharp, quick turn from before. This was slower, more hesitant. The lock clicked. It was the loudest, most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The heavy door creaked open, just a few inches at first, flooding the small room with a blinding slice of light. I flinched, throwing a weak arm over my eyes. The sudden brightness was excruciating after so many days of total darkness. "Hello?" a voice said. It was a boy's voice, quiet and uncertain. "Is anyone in here?" The caretaker said this key was just for storage. I tried to answer, to say something, anything, but my throat was too dry, my body too weak to respond. I just lay there blinking as my eyes slowly adjusted to the light. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright corridor. It was a boy I vaguely recognized from my year, Dylan. He had quiet eyes and always seemed to be on his own, just like me. He peered into the gloom, his expression one of confusion. Then his eyes found me, a crumpled heap on the floor. His face changed in an instant, confusion turning to shock, then to a deep, overwhelming concern. He didn't scream or run away. He just stood there for a second, taking it all in. Then he took a careful step inside, his voice soft and gentle. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Are you all right? What happened to you?" Dylan didn't bombard me with questions. He saw the state I was in, my dirty clothes, my matted hair, the way my body trembled uncontrollably, and his immediate instinct was to help. He knelt beside me, keeping a respectful distance, his voice low and calming. "Don't try to talk," he said softly. "I'm going to get you some help. Just stay here." He disappeared for a moment and a part of me panicked, thinking he would leave me. But he returned almost immediately, carrying his own water bottle and a half-eaten packet of biscuits from his bag. He unscrewed the cap and held the bottle to my lips, helping me take small, careful sips. The water was cool and fresh, so different from the metallic cistern water I'd been drinking. He offered me a biscuit, and I took it with a shaking hand, my fingers too weak to hold it properly. He broke off a tiny piece and fed it to me, as if I were a small child. The sugary sweetness was an explosion of flavor in my mouth, almost too much to handle after days of nothing. He seemed to understand this, giving me only a little at a time, watching me with worried eyes. He had also brought his jumper, a thick, warm hoodie. "You're freezing," he said, gently draping it over my shoulders. The warmth seeped into my chilled bones, a comforting weight that felt like safety. It smelled faintly of him, a clean, reassuring scent. I later learned why Dylan was at school during the holidays. He was a talented artist and had been given special permission to use the art rooms to work on his portfolio for college. He'd been looking for a quiet place to sketch when he'd stumbled upon the locked toilets, his curiosity piqued by the old, disused part of the building. He'd asked the caretaker for the key, thinking it was just an abandoned storeroom. It was pure chance, a one-in-a-million coincidence that he had found me. Or maybe it was fate. He never made me feel like a freak or a victim. He just treated me with a simple, profound kindness that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. He saw that I was too weak to walk, so he spoke to me in that same soothing voice. "I'm going to help you get to the medical room," he explained. "It's not far. I'll be right here with you." He carefully helped me to my feet, my legs buckling underneath me like jelly. He put his arm around my waist, letting me lean heavily on him, and we began the slow, stumbling journey down the corridor. He was my crutch, my support, a steady presence in a world that had been spinning out of control. In that moment, he wasn't just a boy from my year. He was my rescuer, a stranger who was showing me more care than I had ever known. The school medical room was sterile and quiet. Dylan helped me onto the bed and found a first aid kit, cleaning the cuts on my hands with gentle, practiced movements. He called for an ambulance, his voice calm and clear as he explained the situation, though he left out the part about the bullies for my sake. While we waited, he sat with me, not pushing me to talk about what had happened, but just being there. His quiet company was a balm to my frayed nerves. When the paramedics arrived and started asking questions, I felt a fresh wave of panic, but Dylan stayed by my side, a silent pillar of support. He made sure they knew I hadn't eaten properly and was severely dehydrated. After I was checked over at the hospital and given the all clear to leave, the inevitable question arose: where would I go? The police had been called, and they needed to speak to my dad. When they finally got through to him, his reaction was distant and confused. He hadn't even realized I was missing. He thought I had been staying at a friend's house. That single fact hurt more than anything Zara had ever done. It was the ultimate confirmation of my invisibility. The thought of going back to that empty, silent house, to the father who hadn't noticed my absence for a week, was unbearable. I felt the tears I had held back for so long finally start to fall. It was Dylan who stepped in. He had been waiting quietly at the hospital the entire time. He spoke to the police officer and the social worker who had been assigned to my case. "She can stay with me," he said, his voice full of a surprising certainty. "I live on my own. My parents, they passed away a couple of years ago. I have a spare room. She'll be safe there." The adults looked at him, a 16-year-old boy offering to take in another teenager, and you could see the doubt on their faces. But Dylan was persistent. He explained that his older sister was his legal guardian and lived nearby, assuring them he was responsible and that I wouldn't be alone. After a lot of discussion and phone calls to his sister, who confirmed his story and vouched for him, they reluctantly agreed. It was a temporary arrangement, they said, until a better solution could be found. But for me, it felt like a miracle. Dylan took me to his home, a small, tidy house filled with his drawings and paintings. It was quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet like at my dad's house. It was a peaceful quiet. He showed me to the spare room, which was clean and bright, with a window that looked out onto a small garden. "Make yourself at home," he said simply. For the first time in my life, I felt like I might actually have one. Living with Dylan was strange at first. I was so used to being on my own, to making myself invisible, that having someone else in the house felt both comforting and terrifying. I would spend hours in the spare room, too nervous to come out, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. But Dylan was patient. He never pushed me. He would just knock softly on my door and leave a tray of food outside, a sandwich or a bowl of soup, and then walk away, giving me the space I needed. He communicated through these small acts of kindness, telling me without words that I was safe, that he could be trusted. He understood that healing wasn't a race. Slowly, tentatively, I started to venture out of my room. I'd find Dylan in the living room sketching in his notepad, lost in his own world. I would sit on the other end of the sofa, not saying anything, just watching him draw. He never made me feel like I was intruding. Sometimes he would look up and give me a small, gentle smile and then go back to his work. We started to eat together at the small kitchen table. Our first few meals were mostly silent, the only sound the clinking of our cutlery. But gradually the silence became less awkward and more companionable. It was a shared quiet, not a lonely one. One evening, as he was making us both a cup of tea, I finally found the courage to ask him about his parents. He didn't flinch or shut down. He just spoke about them with a soft sadness, but also with a lot of love. He told me about the car accident, about how his older sister had stepped up to take care of him, and how he'd learned to be independent from a young age. He explained that he knew what it felt like to be alone, and that's why he couldn't just leave me at the hospital. Hearing his story made me feel less alone in my own sadness. We were two different people, from two different worlds, but we were both survivors. That conversation was a turning point. I started to talk too, in small fragments at first, about my mum, about how quiet my house had become, about the feeling of being a ghost. I didn't tell him everything about the bullying, not yet, but I told him enough. He listened without judgment, his quiet attention making me feel seen and heard for the first time in years. Our friendship grew in that little house, nurtured by shared meals, quiet evenings, and the slow, careful exchange of our stories. The ice around my heart, which had been frozen solid for so long, began to thaw, drop by precious drop. While I was slowly finding my footing in Dylan's peaceful home, the world outside was dealing with the fallout from my ordeal. The police investigation moved quickly. Once I felt strong enough to talk, I gave them a full statement, with Dylan and his sister by my side for support. Naming Zara, Mia, and Sophie was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. It felt like I was inviting their anger back into my life. But Dylan held my hand under the table at the police station, his steady presence giving me the strength to speak the truth. He reminded me that I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness, and my voice mattered. The school was in an uproar. Security camera footage from the corridor confirmed my story, showing Zara and her friends herding me towards the toilets, and then leaving shortly after, laughing. The evidence was undeniable. The girls were arrested and questioned. Their parents were called in shocked and horrified. The whole school was talking about it, but for once, the whispers weren't about me in a cruel way. They were whispers of shock and sympathy. The school administration took the incident very seriously, and Zara and her friends were permanently expelled. Knowing they couldn't hurt anyone else at that school brought a profound sense of relief. It was justice. My dad was contacted by social services again. The reality of what had happened and his role in it through his neglect finally seemed to sink in. He was devastated and full of remorse. He started going to counseling to deal with his grief properly and began the long process of trying to rebuild his life and hopefully our relationship. It wasn't an overnight fix, but it was a start. For now, it was agreed that the best place for me was to stay with Dylan and his sister. It felt like my life was being rebuilt from the ground up on a new, much stronger foundation. The biggest change, however, was within me. With Dylan's unwavering friendship, I started to come out of my shell. We went back to school together after the holidays, and for the first time, I walked through the corridors with my head held high. Dylan was always by my side, a quiet protector and my best friend. People looked at me differently now, not with pity, but with a newfound respect. I even started to talk to other people, joining the art club with Dylan, discovering a passion for painting I never knew I had. My world, which had once been so small and dark, was slowly filling with color and light. The years that followed were a testament to the healing power of friendship. I never went back to live with my dad, though we slowly rebuilt our connection through weekend visits and long phone calls. He was getting better, and I was happy for him. But my home was with Dylan. His sister officially became my guardian, and their little house became my sanctuary, my anchor, and my home. Dylan and I navigated the rest of our school years together, side by side. We were an unlikely pair, the quiet artist and the girl who was learning to find her voice. But we just worked. We understood each other on a level that no one else could. Our friendship was the cornerstone of our lives. We celebrated our successes together, from Dylan getting accepted into a prestigious art college to me winning a poetry competition. We supported each other through the tough times too, the days when the shadows of our pasts felt a little too close. He knew when I needed space, and I knew when he needed to talk about his parents. We didn't need words to communicate. A shared look or a comfortable silence was often enough. We were more than just friends. We had forged our own unique kind of family, built not on blood but on shared experience, trust, and unconditional love. After college, we rented a small flat together in the city. He pursued his art, his canvases filling with vibrant colors and deep emotions, while I became a writer, using words to build worlds and explore the very feelings I had once been so afraid of. Our home was always filled with creativity, laughter, and the smell of freshly brewed tea. The bullies were a distant memory, their power over me completely gone. The darkness I had endured in that cold, locked room had been replaced by a life so full of warmth and happiness that it sometimes felt like a dream. But it was real. It was a life I had built, with my best friend by my side. Now, looking back, I can see that the worst thing that ever happened to me led me to the best thing in my life. Dylan. He didn't just save me from that toilet, he saved me from the loneliness that had defined my existence. He taught me how to trust, how to love, and how to be happy. Our bond, forged in a moment of darkness, became a beacon of light that guided us both. We were two broken souls who had found a way to heal each other, proving that even after the most harrowing of journeys, it is possible to find not just survival, but a deep and lasting friendship that makes life beautiful.